So let's get real. We've all heard that line, love your enemies. Sounds like a nice pie-in-the-sky idea, right? Maybe even a little weak. But what if I told you that this ain't about being a doormat? What if this is actually the most gangster, most powerful spiritual hack ever dropped? We're gonna crack this thing wide open. What really goes down in your life, in your mind, in your very soul, when that command stops being a nice quote and clicks as the deepest truth you've ever known. We're not talking about forcing a feeling. We're talking about an understanding that flips your entire world upside down in the best way possible. It's gonna get wild. And by the end of this, you're gonna see that enemy, whether it's a person, a situation, that voice in your head, in a way that'll make your jaw drop. So, if you're ready to have your mind blown and find a freedom you didn't even know was on the table, stick with me. This is the good stuff. And hey, if this hits home for you, do me a solid smash that like button, drop a 777 in the comments if you're catching the vibe, and subscribe, because this journey, we're just getting started. Perfect. So let's dive into that first biggest point. Because most of us, when we hear, love your enemy, we instantly think it's about them. We think it's some moral homework assignment, where we got to muster up good vibes for someone who's done us dirty. We grit our teeth and try to play nice, all while feeling like a spiritual pushover. But hold up, that's where we've got it all twisted backwards and upside down. Joel would cut right through that noise. He'd say the whole game isn't about changing your enemy's behavior or winning some cosmic brownie points for being a good person. Nah, this command is a surgical tool designed for one patient dash you. It's a liberation technology for your own soul. It's about your freedom first and last. Think about what an enemy really is to you. It's not just the person who betrayed you or the neighbor who drives you nuts. It's anything, anyone. That triggers in you a storm of anger, resentment, fear, or anxiety. That reaction, that inner hurricane, is the real cage. Your enemy in that moment isn't the person out there, it's the hatred or fear churning inside you. They just flipped the switch, and as long as you're focused on them, on what they did, how wrong they are, how they need to change, you're handing them the keys to your inner peace. You're letting them live rent-free in your head, dictating your emotional weather. That's not freedom. That's spiritual hostage-taking. So, loving your enemy is the jailbreak. It's the realization that you can't fight for peace. You can't punch your way into calm, trying to destroy the enemy. Out there only feeds the enemy within. The belief that your safety and happiness depend on external conditions being just right. Jesus and teachers like Goldsmith point to a radical alternative. What withdraw the fuel? Stop feeding the story. When you truly understand this, you see that loving your enemy means refusing to let their action, or your own story about it, define your internal state. It means looking squarely at that person or situation, and in the quiet of your own consciousness, dissolving the label of enemy. You're not approving of their behavior. You're not inviting them over for dinner. You're simply recognizing that your power, your peace, your connection to something greater cannot be threatened by a character in your life's play. This is the ultimate power move. It's saying, what you do is your business. How I let it affect my spirit is mine, and I choose freedom. It cuts the invisible cord that binds your joy to their actions. When that cord is cut, something miraculous happens. The enemy loses their power over you. They might still be out there doing their thing, but they can no longer touch the core of who you are. You've reclaimed your territory. That burning feeling in your gut cools. The mental movies of revenge or grievance start to lose their picture. You begin to breathe a different air, the air of someone who isn't at war. This understanding transforms the command from a burdensome duty into the key to your own cell. The focus shifts entirely from managing the outside world to mastering your inner landscape. Because here's the raw truth: an enemy you love, in this spiritual sense, by seeing them as incapable of truly harming your real self, is no longer an enemy at all. They're neutralized as a threat to your peace. That's the freedom. That's the point. It was never about changing them. It was about you waking up to what you really are and realizing that nothing and no one out there has the final say on that. Now, this brings us to the next mind bender. If loving your enemy is really about your own freedom, then what exactly is this enemy in the first place? Why do they get under our skin so bad? This is where it gets really personal and maybe a little uncomfortable. Because the spiritual secret, the real cosmic joke, is that your enemy is just a mirror. They're showing you something about yourself you've either forgotten or have been trying real hard to ignore. Think about it. What drives you nuts about that other person? Is it their arrogance, their disrespect, their dishonesty, their sheer laziness? Okay? Now, take a brutally honest look inward. Have you ever, in any situation, been arrogant? Have you ever disrespected someone, maybe even yourself? Have you ever cut a corner with the truth or phoned it in when you knew you could give more? If we're honest, we've all been there. The enemy, then, becomes a spotlight on a part of our own consciousness that we've disowned. We see in them what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. We hate in them what we secretly fear or condemn within us. That's why the reaction is so intense, so heated. It's not really about them. It's a clash with your own shadow. This isn't about guilt, so don't trip. It's about awareness. That coworker who takes all the credit, they might be mirroring your own unexpressed desire for recognition or a fear that your work isn't seen. The relative who pushes all your political buttons, they're mirroring a rigid part of your own belief system that's terrified of being wrong. The enemy is an exact reflection of some unresolved conflict, some unhealed wound, some unrecognized power living inside your own mental and emotional house. They're literally showing you where your work is. This is why trying to change them or defeat them is the ultimate wild goose chase. It's like being mad at your reflection in the mirror for having messy hair and then trying to fix the problem by scrubbing the glass. You can polish that mirror all day, but your hair's still a mess. The solution isn't out there. The solution is to turn around and deal with what's actually being reflected. The irritation, the anger, the judgment you feel, that's your cue. That's the invitation. The enemy, by being exactly who they are, is handing you a roadmap to your own freedom. They're pointing you to the locked door inside you. When you finally get this, the whole dynamic shifts. The person stops being a monster in your story and starts becoming a teacher, a really tough, in-your-face, non-negotiable kind of teacher. Your attention pulls back from their faults and turns inward to the feeling they trigger. You ask, why does this specific thing bother me so much? What does this reaction say about a belief I'm holding? Where in my life have I felt this before? This is the alchemy. This is where you stop being a victim of the reflection and start being the student of it. The heat of your anger transforms into the light of your own understanding. And as you do that inner work, as you acknowledge that shadow, understand its origin, and dissolve its power through that understanding, a funny thing happens. The mirror changes. The person out there might not act any different, but they no longer reflect back that same charged emotion. They lose their sting, because you've cleaned up what was being seen. The mirror just shows you what's there. When you change what's here, the reflection over there has to change too. And right here is where most of the world calls time out. Because looking in that mirror, doing that inner work, it feels passive. It feels like you're just taking it. The old, hardwired reaction screams that strength means hitting back. That power means winning the fight, that letting go of the grudge is letting them win. But that's the trap, that's the illusion the whole world is buying. What we're talking about is the exact opposite of weakness. To look at that reflection, to dissolve the label of enemy within your own consciousness, is the single most powerful move you can ever make. It's not a retreat, it's a transcendence. Loving your enemy, in this deep spiritual sense, is the ultimate power move. Let's break down why. Worldly power is always about control over people, over situations, over resources. It's external, it's fragile, and it's a full-time job of defense and management. Someone is always trying to take it. But spiritual power, the kind Jesus and Goldsmith point to, is about sovereignty, absolute command over your own inner kingdom. No one can give it to you, and no one can take it from you unless you hand it over through your reactions. When you love your enemy, by seeing them as a mirror and refusing to let their reflection dictate your state of being, you are claiming that sovereignty. You are declaring that your peace, your stability, your access to love and intelligence is not contingent on the good behavior of other characters in your life. That is an invincible position. What can they do? They can't touch that. This love isn't a sentimental feeling, it's a conscious force. It's the recognition of what is real. In the heat of conflict, what feels most real is the hurt, the betrayal, the injustice. That's the surface storm. But beneath that storm is a deeper reality, the reality of your own eternal nature, which is whole and unassailable. To love is to anchor yourself in that deeper reality, even as the waves crash on the surface. It's like knowing the sun is still shining even during a hurricane. You don't deny the hurricane, but you don't believe the storm has destroyed the sun either. This love is the active choice to abide in the sun, in your true self, while the weather of human conflict does its thing. That takes incredible strength. It takes more guts to stand in that love than to throw a punch, because you're standing against the entire momentum of your own ego and the world's agreement about how to handle conflict. This is the power move that disarms every conflict at its root. You're not fighting on the battlefield they've set up. You've changed the game entirely. They're playing checkers, arguing over squares, and you've realized you're not even a piece on that board. You're the player, or even the awareness watching the board. From that position, you see their moves not as threats, but as motions in a play. Your response then isn't born of reaction, but of a quiet, clear intelligence that knows what is needed, if anything is needed at all. Sometimes the most powerful action is no action from the ego. Sometimes it's a silence that speaks louder than any shout. This love neutralizes the poison in the situation. It refuses to add more negative energy to the fire. It starves the conflict of the very fuel it needs to burn your belief in the enemy's story. When you stop feeding it, the fire, eventually, has to go out. You haven't been overpowered. You've outpowered the entire paradigm of conflict by stepping out of it. That's not losing. That's the only win that ever really matters. Now, to really get how this power move works, you got to understand the actual location of the fight. We keep talking about enemies out there, situations over there, but that's a misdirection, a slick trick of the senses. The real battlefield, the only place where the war of me versus them is ever actually fought, is in your own mind. It's not in the office, it's not on social media, it's not across the dinner table. It's in the private, silent theater of your thinking. Every conflict is, first and foremost, an internal event. Until you see that, you'll be forever running to different battlefields, changing jobs, ending relationships, thinking you've left the war, only to find the same enemy waiting for you in a new uniform. Because you brought the battlefield with you. You brought your mind. That person who wronged you, the actual event is over. It happened in time. But the real damage, the lingering poison, is the rerun. It's the late night movie you keep playing on the screen of your own thoughts, the edited director's cut where you're the star, the victim, and they're the villain. You're having conversations with them in your head you'll never have in real life. You're crafting arguments, defending yourself, winning imaginary victories. That's the battlefield. That's where you're losing your peace hour by hour. That's where the enemy is being kept alive long after the actual incident has passed. They've moved on, maybe, but you're still there, on that mental field, fighting a ghost. This is why the command to love is so brilliantly practical. It's not sending you out into the world to hug a bully. It's issuing a direct order for the battlefield of your mind. It's saying, lay down your weapons in your own thinking. Disband the army of grievances you've assembled in your head. Stop the mental reruns. When you catch yourself drafting that scathing text for the 10th time or replaying the insult, that's the moment. That's the critical juncture. That's where you apply this teaching. You consciously choose, right there in the trench of your own mind, to not pick up the weapon of bitter thought. You choose to see the person not as a villain in your personal movie, but as another confused soul playing out their own pain. You change the narrative internally. You might still need to set a boundary outwardly. You might still need to take practical action, but you do it from a mind that isn't at war. You do it from clarity, not from the smoke of internal conflict. This shifts everything, because when the battlefield is quiet inside, the outside world loses its power to disturb you. The same old triggers show up, but they find no army to mobilize. They find a quiet, observing presence. They meet not a reaction, but a response. If a response is even needed, most of the time, you'll see that the only action required was to stop the war inside. The external situation often just resolves, or becomes a non-issue when you're no longer feeding it with your mental energy. You realize you've been fighting shadows on the wall of your own cave. Loving your enemy is the act of turning around to see the light source casting those shadows. Once you face the light, the truth of your own peaceful being, the shadows on the wall lose their menace. They might still dance, but you know what they are. You're no longer afraid of the shapes. You're free, because the war was only ever happening in one place between your own ears. And you have the only key to that peace. This realization brings us to maybe the most liberating piece of the whole puzzle. When you truly see that the battlefield is in your own mind, and the enemy is a reflection, you start to get a sneaking suspicion about the nature of the threat itself. If the whole drama is a production of your own consciousness, a play of thought and reaction, then what exactly is doing the harming? The person's actions happened, but the lasting injury, the sense of being wounded or diminished, that's a story you're telling yourself about what happened. It's a shadow. And here's the radical, almost unbelievable truth. You cannot be hurt by a shadow. You can only be frightened by it. The damage isn't in the event. It's in the belief that the event has the power to define or shatter your real, spiritual self. Think about what a shadow is. It has no substance. It can't touch you. It can look huge and menacing, but it's just an absence of light caused by an object. Your enemy, in the ultimate sense, is like that. Their words or actions are the object. The story of hurt, the identity of the wounded one, the grudge, that's the shadow. It's a dark shape cast on the wall of your awareness, but it is not real substance. It cannot stain or break what you truly are. Your true self, that unconditioned awareness, that spiritual being, is the light itself, and light cannot be damaged by the shadows it casts. It is the very thing that makes the shadow visible. When you believe the shadow is real, when you spend your life fighting it, you're like a man trying to scrub a stain off a wall that's only a play of darkness. You exhaust yourself battling an illusion. This is the core of the freedom. When Jesus says to love your enemies, he's inviting you to stop being afraid of the shadow, to turn and face the light, to recognize that what you are is the unshakable, unchanging awareness in which the entire drama of friend and enemy comes and goes. The insult, a shadow. The betrayal, a shadow. The financial loss, the gossip, the rejection, all shadows playing across the screen of your experience. They feel real, or they elicit real feelings, but they do not have the power to touch the core of your being unless you grant that power by believing the story. The moment you withdraw your belief from the story, the shadow loses its terrifying shape. It might still be there, but it's just a pattern of light and dark. It's neutral. This is where love does its mightiest work. To love the enemy shadow is to see it for what it is, a temporary formation with no power of its own. It's to stop giving it authority over your inner state. You don't have to fight it. You simply have to turn up the light of your own understanding. As you do, the shadow inevitably changes, shrinks, or disappears entirely because you've changed the relationship of the object to the light. You've stopped focusing on the scary shape and remembered you are the source that illuminates it. The person who was your enemy doesn't necessarily change, but your experience of them changes completely because you're no longer interacting with a monster of your own making. You're interacting with another soul, perhaps lost in their own shadows, casting a shape you once feared. You realize the whole time you were only ever afraid of your own misinterpretation. The threat was never real. It was a ghost story you agreed to believe. And when that agreement is revoked, the haunting stops. You walk right through the shadow, and it has no substance to stop you. So what's left when the battlefield in your mind goes quiet? When you stop fighting shadows and realize no reflection in the mirror can break the glass itself. What remains isn't some dull, neutral blankness. It's not just the absence of drama. What rushes in to fill that space is something solid, something unshakable, something you might have spent your whole life searching for in all the wrong places. This is the payoff, the real treasure. This understanding, living it, breathing it, unlocks a life of unshakable peace. Not a peace that's dependent on things going your way, on people being nice, on the world behaving itself. That's a fragile ceasefire, always one headline away from collapse. This is different. This is the peace that comes from knowing, in your bones, that what you are cannot be assailed. It's the deep, quiet hum of a foundation that no storm can reach. This peace isn't passive, it's powerfully alive. It's the space from which everything else flows, clear action, genuine compassion, real creativity. Before, your energy was siphoned off, a little bit every day, to manage that internal battlefield, to fuel the grievances, to keep the story of me versus them on life support. It was exhausting. Now, that energy is reclaimed. It's like getting a massive power upgrade you never knew you had. That same intensity that used to go into worry, into rehearsing arguments, into resentment, now becomes available for living. It becomes the fuel for your purpose, for your joy, for simply being present in a moment without the static of an internal war. You have a steadiness that people will feel. You become a calm center, not because you're ignoring the chaos of the world, but because you've found a depth within yourself that chaos cannot penetrate. This is the peace that passes all worldly understanding. It doesn't make logical sense to the mind that's used to bartering for safety. It can't be figured out. It can only be lived into. It's the natural state when you've stopped looking for your safety, your worth, or your identity in the shifting sands of other people's opinions and actions. You've found it within, as the very fabric of your being, and from that anchor everything changes. The same old challenges show up, they will, but they don't land the same way. They don't stick. They don't hook you into a day's long drama. You meet them from this place of settledness. You respond from a deeper wisdom because you're not reacting from a triggered fear. Your relationships transform, not necessarily because the other people change, but because you're no longer bringing the hidden agenda of needing them to be a certain way for you to be okay. You're free to see them and to love them as they are. Your entire life becomes less of a struggle and more of a flow. This is the promise, not of a problem-free life, but of a you that is free in the midst of all of life, a you that is finally undeniably at home,